Sign ancestor shows up in many forms and disguises, one of which is a set of folk tales, known in English as the Bear's Son tale, as well as by other names. After spending several decades comparing and contrasting the various European versions of these tales, I was able to extract the master narrative, given that some versions were much more archaic in terms of their plot than others, particularly those collected in the Pyrenean region. In short, it's been an exercise in diachronic cultural linguistics, in which translation, understood broadly, has played a major role. The research is focused on a pan-European phenomenon, the Bear's Son tales, whose protagonist is half human, half bear. This is because his mother was a human female, and his father was a bear. Hence, the figure functions as an intermediary, as a kind of Jesus bear, according to one informant, and is a central component in this much earlier worldview grounded in the belief in ursine ancestors. Moreover, not only are these tales found in Basque, as well as in Indo-European languages, the Bear's Son name, he has a name in Basque, and variants of that name are found in Indo-European languages, a linguistic signature that is an indirect proxy for past contacts. While this motif represents one of the most widely disseminated European folktales, until the belief that humans descended from bears was plugged into the interpretive frame of these narratives and related performances, they were not viewed as particularly significant. Indeed, there is a performance counterpart to the story of the birth, life, and exploits of this character, a narrative passed down orally from one generation to the next. Moreover, in the Pyrenean zone, the Bearfest performances, celebrated there each year, still incorporate elements taken from the plot of the Bear's Son narrative, reenacting, for instance, the initial encounter between his mother and father, and his subsequent birth in the bear cave. Here you can see on the map the Pyrenean locations of the most elaborate reenactments of the Bear's Son tale and the Fêtes de l'Ours. The zone extends from the Basque-speaking zone in the west to the Mediterranean in the east. These festivals continue to be performed each year, while their origins are currently under intense investigation. Moreover, all across Europe, in what were once remote mountain villages, similar, although somewhat less structurally complex performances have survived, where the performers dress up as bears. And for those of you who might not be familiar with exactly where the Basque Country is, you can see on the left more or less the outlines of the Basque-speaking region in the 1st century BC, and then on the right, the much smaller Basque-speaking region today. You can see that it's receded in terms of size. Okay, here's the summary. One day, a young woman goes walking in the woods when suddenly she meets a bear. In some versions, it's a very handsome bear, and she goes off with him to his cave. In others, the bear, being of a more brutish type, grabs her and carries her off. Sometime later, a child is born, half bear, half human. Years pass, and one day, little bear decides he wants to go out to see the world. He manages to remove the rock that his father places each day at the mouth of the cave when he goes out hunting. Little bear and his mother escape, and at this point, the adventures of little bear begin. Walking along a path in the woods, he spies 4 animals ahead of him, standing next to a dead deer. They are a mountain lion, a dog, an eagle, and an ant. The mountain lion calls out to him, "We're hungry. We've been arguing about how to divide up the meat. Can you help us?" Little bear responds, saying that he will try. "Mountain lion, I'll give you the haunch, which is what you like best. And to dog he gives the ribs. Addressing eagle, he says, to you I'll give the innards and intestines, because you don't have any teeth, and this is what you like best. Finally, to the tiny ant, Little Bear says, "To you I'll give you the skin and bones, and when you've eaten the marrow from the bones, you can use them for your house when it rains." Here we'll say how the notion of a vision quest and a medicine bundle fit into this. With that, Mountain Lion responds, "You've done so well with the division that we want to reward you." And each of them gives him an amulet, telling him that when he needs their help, all he has to do is call out their name. That way, he will gain the animal's innate abilities and take on the shape of the animal in question. Mountain Lion gives him a tuft of fur, Dog another tuft, the eagle a feather, and Little Ant a leg, because she has several. Time passes, and Little Bear finds himself at a farmstead and meets a young woman who lives there with her old father. Naturally, since all good stories need a romantic twist, Little Bear falls in love and wants to run off with the young woman. But she explains she can't, because she must care for her old father, who happens to be immortal. Little Bear insists that there has to be a way to get the old man to die. The young woman tells him to come back the next day to the garden, where she will be combing the old man's hair and removing his lice. Little Bear is to climb the tree and hide in its branches, while she asks the old fellow what it will take to make him die. So Little Bear shows up, shape shifts into an ant, and climbs silently up into the tree, from where he hears the old man's response. "For me to die, the challenger will have to do battle with my brother, who is a shapeshifter too. He will appear as a porcupine, and the challenger must show up as a mountain lion and engage in battle with him. If he triumphs, a hare will appear, and the challenger must then turn into a dog and catch it." The old man continues, "Once the hare is caught, a pigeon will fly up, and my opponent must turn into an eagle. Snatch the pigeon, open it, and remove the egg inside it. Take the egg and break it on the forehead of my brother, who by then will appear as a snake or a dragon in later versions. When that happens, the egg inside my head will break and I will become mortal and die." Naturally, Little Bear is able to carry out all of these instructions, shape-shifting first into one animal, then another, while his opponent does the same. In the end, the shape-shifted snake or dragon is defeated, and Little Bear's opponent is no longer immortal. To review, the bear's son is half human, half bear, born at the union of a human female and a bear. Hence, he's an intermediary being combining two natures. After leaving the bear cave, he begins his adventures, going out into the world, where he undertakes what might be best described as a vision quest, a ritual similar to the one still practiced today by Native Americans, in which the seeker of the vision goes into the forest alone to acquire one or more protective animals. Often the seeker, whether male or female, goes nude, does not eat or drink, waiting for a sign from the animal in question. And after having obtained objects pertaining to the animal or the animals that end up making themselves known to the person, these Native Americans keep them in a special medicine bundle. Little Bear's encounter and the talismans he receives gives him the ability to shapeshift into the form of each animal when needed, a characteristic regularly associated with practitioners of circumpolar bear ceremonialism. Anyone familiar with shamanic healing practices would recognize the role played by these animal helpers. And here are some examples of medicine bundles that are utilized by Native Americans to carry around the amulets that they have acquired from their helper animals. What we have here are 4 helper animals, spirit helper animals, and a closer analysis of the plot will reveal the cultural conceptualizations that earlier formed the interpretive framework of the tale. That is, the animistic cosmovision typical of hunter-gatherers, along with the associated belief in shape-shifting, and that is embedded in the tale or the narrative itself. When interpreted at a deeper level, what we find in the tales is a series of purely ritual battles between a young shaman apprentice, who is already half bear, and his adversary, a much older shaman, with equally remarkable shape-shifting attributes. In this challenge, the four spirit animal helpers are of fundamental importance to the hero, beginning with the smallest one, the ant. So what we have is nature as a backdrop. And nature is the backdrop upon which the story in the past was projected. When we interpret the ritual battles, what we find really going on is a relationship between predator and prey. You have the mountain lion going after his lunch, the porcupine, not a smart move, but in the story. You have the dog, perhaps earlier a fox, who goes after a hare. The eagle snatches the pigeon. Then we have the pigeon egg and the snake dragon, which appears to be kind of an inversion. If we have time in the discussion section, I can tell you more about that. So what we have is a story that goes against the Western view of the law of the jungle. It's a different view of nature, an older and, in some senses, a more modern view. The equitable division of the dead bear, or dead deer, can be read as a parable of sharing in which Little Bear restores the natural order of things. It speaks of the harmony and balance of nature, and the interlocking networks of dependencies that act to maintain this balance. Large carnivores bring down the prey. Smaller carnivores, foxes, etc., then approach and eat the scraps. Next in line come the scavenger birds, eagles and vultures, and finally, the insects arrive to pick clean the skin and bones. Viewed from the perspective of modern conservation biology, the food web described implicitly in the narrative suggests an understanding of the dynamics of trophic cascades and the concept of keystone species. That is, when the actions of large the actions of large carnivores impact the complex food web dynamics in positive ways. Well, see that the animistic worldview of these tales is really not that far away. The belief that humans and bears could mate and produce fertile offspring was accepted as factual in much of Europe throughout the Middle Ages and in some locations beyond. Hence, until that belief faded from view, the bear-son tale was interpreted by audiences in a very different and far more realistic fashion than it is by modern readers. Plus, rather than being long forgotten, the belief that humans and animals could shapeshift, humans becoming animals or vice versa, and that certain people were equipped with animal helpers was widely accepted in Europe until quite recently. Indeed, it was a key component in the arguments made by highly educated witch hunters well into the 17th century. Now, we will look at the pathways of oral transmission and translation. Again, translation understood in a broad sense. Looking at vertical transmission. Here we're looking at a single location, a single geographic location, in which the transmission takes place from one generation to the next in the same language, no translation, only reproduction, partial or total of the tale. It goes from one generation to the next in an increasingly bilingual setting, leading to partial or total translation of the tale when rendering it into the second language. The retelling of the tale, now fully translated into the second language by the new generation of monolinguals with no knowledge of the first language of their elders, but still resided in the same zone. A second type of horizontal transmission. This is when the stories move from one location to another. Speakers of one language moving to a new location would retell, translate the narrative they had heard in their native language into what was for them a non-native second language to an audience composed exclusively of speakers of the second language. Next, speakers of the second language, who were now twice or more removed from the original story, would pass their versions on to subsequent generations. Now, we have here one example of how bizarre objects and actions get introduced into the stories. Clearly, in addition to inevitable occasional failures of memory on the part of the tellers of the tales, another major cause for changes that can be detected in them seems to come from the fact that when viewed in the Longue, Durée, language change, replacement was also going on in various parts of Europe. We're talking about a very deep time depth here. A bilingual generation of storytellers would develop in a given location, who would keep a few elements in the original language which the speaker and the bilingual audience still understood, but the meaning of which the next generation of monolingual speakers would no longer comprehend. They simply would not understand the words, and they would keep them, nonetheless, as exotic or bizarre entities. In short, these processes of vertical and horizontal transmission often required the teller to translate the tale from one language into another, which also contributed to the incomplete knowledge transfer between generations with respect to the story elements themselves. Now, we can look at the role of translation as the mark of cultural and linguistic context in times past. By paying close attention to the changes that take place in the stories, and remember, this is one of the most widespread stories in European folklore, one is able to identify evidence in the translations that indicate the nature of the transmissions that took place in times past. For example, the name of the protagonist in the Basque tales is Hamalau, which translates as the number 14. Hence, find in tales in which the hero goes by the name of 14, or by one of the Romance variants of that same number, as is the case, for instance, in Spanish, Catalan, and Italian versions. This suggests that the ultimate source of these tales was probably the Basque language version itself. Now, we can look at factors leading to changes in the text and the fragmentation of the narrative line. Over time, there is a gradual erosion of the cultural conceptualizations informing the earlier animistic version and Ursine genealogy. This, in turn, leads to the loss of awareness on the part of subsequent generations of tellers and hence translators of the tale concerning the deeper meaning of the role played by the four spirit animal helpers and subsequent shape-shifting that takes place. As time passes, Christianity contributes to this erosion, bringing about a conceptual divide, which sets humans, superior beings, above, totally apart and above, right, animals, who are seen as inferior beings. This has been brought up a couple of times earlier in other talks. And as this portrayal of animal otherness becomes increasingly entrenched in the worldview utilized by both the tellers of the tale and their audiences, it becomes harder to understand the earlier interpretive framework. Now we find the breakdown. In some versions of the tale, the animal helpers disappear entirely and are replaced by figures more in consonance with the later worldview. Instead of shamanic animal helpers, the hero acquires 2 or 3 anthropomorphic companions, huge male figures endowed with miraculous physical strength. Alternatively, the encounter with the 4 animal helpers often survives, but does so as a separate tale. In the process, its structural importance to the overall plot is lost. Episodes from the plot detach themselves entirely and wander off, becoming viewed as standalone stories. When this happens, we find, whoops, I just moved back here. Okay. Episodes from the plot then end up as standalone stories. Right. At other times, characters from the original narrative survive in these standalone versions of the tale and can be easily recognized in them. For example, we have the figure of a kind of ogre portrayed as the immortal enemy who shows up in Slavic tales as Kocie Nieśmiertelny in Polish, poor accent, or Kocie Desmierty in Russian. This standalone story is classified by the motif type, the ogre's or devil's heart in the egg, and it's classified as type 302. Here we have the Russian version of the story that tells how a warlock called Koche, the immortal, carries off a princess and keeps her prisoner in a golden castle. The prince, named Ivan, right, encounters her one day as she's walking alone and disconsolate in the castle garden and is cheered by the prospect of escaping with him. She goes to the warlock and coaxes him with false and flattering words, saying, "My dearest friend, tell me, I pray you, will you never die?" "Certainly not," he says. "Well," says she, "and where is your death?" And here we note that in this case his death is portrayed as a concrete object that must be located, albeit with great difficulty, and not as the result of a process of successful ritual battles. Eventually, Koche tells her the following: "My death is far from here and hard to find. On the wide ocean, in that sea is an island, and on that island there grows a green oak. And beneath the oak is an iron chest, and in the chest is a small basket, and in the basket is a hare, and in the hare is a duck, and in the duck is an egg. And he who finds the egg and breaks it kills me at the same time." The prince procures the fateful egg, and with it in his hands he confronts the immortal giant. In one of the descriptions of Koche's death, he is said to be killed by a blow to his forehead inflicted by the mysterious egg. Now, we can see evidence of the changes that take place over time, and we see it in a broad view. In terms of the hero, in the earlier version, half bear, half human, he's the bear son. In the Slavic version, what we have is Prince Ivan, with a name that has traces of Ivanushka, which happens to be the name of the bear's son in the Slavic tales. Then we have the female protagonist. She's a young woman who cannot leave her father. In the new version, or in the more recent Slavic version, she's a princess who is held captive as the antagonist of the tale. In the first version, it's an old man who is immortal. In the second, it's the giant who is immortal, right? Then we have the powers attributed to the main characters. In the first, it's shamanic. It has to do with shape-shifting. In the second, it's physical strength and prowess. A shift from one kind of magical or shamanic thought to a more modern one in which strength is what is important. Right? We're back to the law of the jungle. Then, in terms of the cast of characters, they are commoners in the first, and they're royalty in the second. The role of predator animals, in the first one, they are active, they're spirit helpers, they're shapeshifters. They disappear in the Slavic version. The role of prey animals, they're active shapeshifters playing the role of the old man's brother in the first version. In the second, they're passive, physically dissected by the hero to obtain the egg. However, mortality is caused by a blow to the forehead. With what object? An egg, in both cases. Then, the resistance or resilience of these tales over many millennia can be seen in the fact that the legend of Koche is still very popular today and is used in various games, movies, and theater shows. In them, we have the villain, the character who plays the role of Koche. We have the young female protagonist who is saved by Get Out, in this case, who plays the role of Prince Ivan. And we find that the game is based on a book, a series by the same name by a Polish author, Andrzej Sapkowski. Now, looking at what the vehicles are that contributed to the survival of this earlier animistic view across time, first of all, at the core, we find the belief in the bare ancestors, a belief in shape-shifting, shamanism, a non-anthropocentric animistic view of nature, which again, as I said earlier, in some ways this view is very modern, it's very 21st century. Then we have the story of the life and times of the hero as a shaman apprentice. We have his role as an intermediary between humans and animals, and bears, obviously. We have the vision quest, we have the medicine bundle, we have the acquisition of his spirit animal helpers. Then the narrative is externalized in performance art. We have multiple examples of bear fests performed in villages across Europe. the performers dressed as bear humans, and quite possibly as the bear son himself. And here's some examples. These are all very recent photographs that have been taken in the last 5 years. Here we have some representatives from Southern Europe. You have 2 examples from Greece, one from Sardinia. You also have one that some of you might recognize. It comes from Bulgaria. Then we have a few more. There are many, many of them. At the bottom, you can see 2 examples from Romania where they go all out and dress up with bear skins in their heads, real bear skins. And you can say both the furry ones at the top and the ones that end up being made of straw. In 2012, Charles Frank, who is a very well-known French photographer, came out with a book. His book contains many, many photographs. He went around to 18 different countries and photographed all of this across Europe. The book sold out in a matter of a couple months. People were shocked. This is Europe. And he said, yes, it is. He argues in that book that these contemporary performers probably reflect the figure of the bear's son himself. You can see the examples of the photographs. He put them all up online. Okay. These are the examples of the ones that you have here in Poland. These guys don't look too much like bears, but they are part of the same lineage. When you look at the Sapulsky straw bears going back in time, the one picture from 1950, the other from 1963, you can see that you have a pea-halm bear, which is a particular kind of straw that makes the bear look very fluffy. This type of bear outfit is also found in Germany. They actually have a museum in Germany for straw bears, but the people here have not gotten it together yet to have representatives in that museum. If anybody's interested, I know the director of the museum in Germany. Okay, here are some other examples. These look a little bit more like bears. Their outfits are remarkable. These are absolutely beautiful outfits. Okay, so when we look at the Longue, when viewed from this point of view, we can see that the tale has been retold and translated thousands of times, for variants of it show up in many languages spoken in Europe. And until now, it's been difficult because people did not recognize the notion of the descent from bears, that humans descended from bears. We can appreciate until the 19th and 20th centuries, when the majority of these tales were first collected and recorded in written form. We are talking primarily about face-to-face oral transmissions, which span the many millennia, separating us from those hunter-gatherers who first came up with the story. Perhaps most surprising is the fact that in this process, involving multiple levels of translation and reinterpretation, enough of the elements embedded in the archaic worldview have survived, both in the tales themselves as well as in the associated performance art, that we can still perceive the outlines of the original narrative. To conclude, clearly in the intervening millennia, separating us from our hunter-gatherer ancestors, Europe has experienced several major social-economic and social culture and economic transformations, both ideological and demographic, all of which have acted to undermine this hunter-gatherer ideology and the animistic worldview that supported it. Nonetheless, the primacy of the figure of the bear and the ursine pattern of descent intrinsic to the pan-European bear-son tales is still visible beneath the accumulated layers of translation and transformation. Hence, we can see that the interdisciplinary approach and diachronic emphasis highlighted in this talk can be a valuable tool for work in cultural linguistics, and more specifically for the study of European folklore and thought in the Longue. And this is a recent photograph with actually people that I know telling me good luck.
thank you very much, Professor Frank. And now it's time to